All right, we will move right along to Elizabeth up next. And just to kind of,
Hello.
hello. Sorry, go ahead. I just want to just remind everybody, for anyone that has come in throughout the evening, feel free to type any questions in the chat and we will have time at the end for some question and answer. So sorry, Elizabeth, I didn't mean to cut you off
No
there.
problem.
The floor is yours.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So my project has been on storytelling as emotional processing. So just right on the top, I'm going to give you just a little bit of a content warning because I am going to talk, there is going to be some mention of sexual assault, depression, and withdrawal. I'm going to let you know definitely beforehand before I get into those places. And you're going to see this symbol. I'm not going to go too heavily into it, but it is going to be brought up. Right. So just for a little bit of background on my research, right? This is coming from my own thesis work where I kind of drew from my own life and experiences and my own traumas, and I kind of invented this sort of story about them and used that as a way to kind of think about and reflect on those experiences. And so that's kind of what has brought me to my project today. Right, so the idea of storytelling as processing, as a way of processing your emotional trauma or difficulties, right? A lot of times when we share and we talk about our stories, we are seeking out catharsis, a way to feel like we belong and feel connected to other people, right? Storytelling is also a way to help prove in like how to reflect on your life and just to help regulate emotions, to go through and reflect on what you've been through. But in particular with storytelling, I am very focused on the idea of a transformative aspect. How do you take storytelling and turn it into something else? Your past, your memories, all these experiences, what begins to happen when you're shifting them away from your reality into somewhere that verges in the fictional? What is existing between that space? So my questions that I would like everyone to consider is, what is the story you would tell and what is the story you want to tell? Because those may not necessarily have the same answer. So when I'm talking about a transformative story, the idea of turning your story into something else, there really is no better example of that in action than within animation. Particularly these days in adult animation, we have these cartoons that are bright and fun and look silly on the surface, but are kind of just this pretty package for these really heavy topics. And we use these characters who can physically fall apart and visually show what's going on in their psyche. In the book Animation, Genre, and Authorship, Paul Wells discusses animation's ability to serve as a metaphor. Right? It serves as a symbol that transcends materiality, but makes material impact. We see these stories, they are not real, they are fictional, but that does not dilute the impact they have on our lives. So I'm going to be going through 2 different cartoons for you, just 2 episodes, 2 different shows. And I'm going to start with an episode of Toucan and Birdie by Lisa Hanawal, right? Which really shows a fantastic demonstration of ways to talk about trauma and show trauma without actually showing the trauma happening or even saying the words sexual assault. Right, so there's your warning for that. I'm going to get into that for you. Right, so in the season 1 episode 9, we have the Jelly Lakes, where our titular characters go to this place from Birdie's childhood where she used to swim, she used to have fun. But we know something happened here, something happened to Birdie. And so eventually in this episode, she does tell her friend Tuka the story of how she was sexually assaulted as a child. And the way this episode does this is that we are shifting the animation style. We go from this bright, happy style into this little piece of egg art, into this more subdued paper cut silhouette. And so Birdie goes through and tells her friend this story with as few details as possible. Through the visuals, we don't need to hear the specifics. Right? It was very purposeful to never show what this man looked like or what actually happened, but we can understand it just through these visuals. And they take this very serious tone for the show. And even as our character, after telling her story, goes forth to try and complete the swim she wasn't able to do as a child, During this, we then are able to get a visual representation of her confronting her younger self and what happened to her. She is able to meet with her younger self and reconcile what happened, to almost forgive herself and forgive all that shame we felt. And it's not possible to kind of see this emotion without this form of animation. We are able to see Birdie begin to go on her recovery, and we physically see her lift herself up and lead herself to where she needs to get going, right? To this island she meant to reach as a child. And we begin her to start taking her first steps forward toward her recovery, all mostly told through these paper cutouts, right? Our next episode that we're discussing comes from BoJack Horseman by Raphael Bob Waxberg. Right, so this is where we're gonna, there's a lot of stuff that goes on in BoJack, but we're gonna talk about the character of Diane in particular, and how she deals with depression and withdrawal during her writer's block. Right, so in the season 6, episode 10, Good Damage, where we have our character Diane, who has been struggling with depression in order to write this book, where she wants to write a book of essays on her own damage and how it was actually good because it made her who she is today. But throughout it, we see her kind of troubled psyche represented by these scratchy, unfinished, messy sketches and these drawings as she kind of visualizes herself and all her loved ones struggling to go through and getting this negative self-talk, right? She is struggling to write this book, and it gets to a point where she tries to go off her medication, and she begins to experience these symptoms of withdrawal while forcing herself to write this book. And then these sketches, they get worse for her. They get messier, they get more aggressive, more damaging. She hears or visualized as the people she cares about, her loved ones, telling her that she isn't good enough, that it isn't an interesting story, that she's the one in the wrong. And you hear these as her negative voice and as she agrees with them. But as Diana's working through this, she ends up writing this story about Ivy Tran, the food court detective, this happy, light novel that Diane doesn't believe she has any interest in writing. It's a colorful, happy character, and she knows it's not that easy to be happy. But this, her own creation, kind of confronts her in her psyche and asks, wouldn't it be nice if it was? And we can see within this character that Diane accidentally wrote, there are still a lot of aspects of her own character that she has put into it. She has the similarity with this character she invented, that this is a character who also lost her father, who had also recently moved to Chicago and comes from the same ethnic background. When Diane brings this issue up with her manager, that she doesn't want to write this happy book, this fun book that her manager insists that she might want to, Diane comes to the idea that if she doesn't write this book, that means all the damage, all the abuse, it isn't good damage, it's just damage. She had been under this kind of classic artist idea that you have to be abused, and that's where your work comes from, that's what makes you special, who you are. And her dream was to write this book so people like her could feel less alone. The character Princess Carolyn then consoles Diane, telling her that she would be happy to have a world where her daughter could grow up reading books like the fun Ivy Tran book, and that just maybe this fun book that's lighthearted and has a good story could still have that same impact on people, could still help them feel less alone. We see Diane kind of go through the same idea of what I'm talking about, where she's creating her own little transformative narrative, where she creates this character that could have this happy life that maybe she didn't get to have. So all of these cartoons, they eventually, at the end of the day, they come to this message that things can get better, that there is some idea of hope, right? We do not have to carve up our own damage, our own trauma, and sell it in order to justify it, right? And it's not exclusive to adult animation. Even children's cartoons get extremely dark and can go to painful places, while still then reinforcing this message in children that they are good enough and that they can get through this sort of thing. And so really that's kind of what the idea of all these stories are all about, that life is more than the things that happen to you, which is often what it can feel like when you go through a trauma, that you're out of control. But when you're writing a story, you are taking control of your own narrative. You are deciding what is happening, what that means, and what happens next. And when you realize that you are the person who is in control of what your life is and what the story is you tell, it means you get to choose where that's all heading. And that's really all I have for you. Just my love of cartoons and what they mean for me, and being able to take the time to just cry about them for about 10 minutes.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I just want to say, I feel like you just explained art therapy in a way that I've never even heard any art therapist explain it. And like, it was so articulate and effective. And it's like, yeah, this is exactly what happens. Right. So thank you so much for bringing that to the table in that way.
Yeah.